Hello, everyone. I'm John Gruber, the chair of the economics department and your MC for today. We're going to have an incredible panel today. I'm really glad y'all were able to come. But before we start, I don't want to ruin the proceedings, but I want to give away a little secret, which is it turns out winning a Nobel Prize just isn't that hard. Okay, so when I was faculty here in 2011, of all my colleagues, 1/6 have already won the Nobel Prize, and we're not even done yet. Okay, so it turns out, like, probably all of you will win it too. I mean, it's just not that hard. So we'll get a lot of tips today, and you can follow them. But please, don't be intimidated by these incredibly intimidating people, because it's just not that hard. You'll get there. So I think I want to say two things to start. One is to recognize the fact that we don't have all MIT's economics Nobel Prize winners up here. Peter Diamond, who won 2011, is kindly here to help us along and can throw in his comments when we get it wrong. And of course, the giants who helped found our economics department, Paul Samuelson and Bob Solow, were some of the earliest Nobel Prize winners. I also want to say something that is very important, because you'll see it today and you know it if you know them, but it's very important for folks here to realize that you also don't have to be an asshole to win the Nobel Prize. Okay, these are incredibly nice people, incredibly wonderful colleagues. Now, Bengt will be embarrassed, but Bengt co-won the Nobel Prize with someone from another institution I won't mention, Harvard. And when he won the award, the quote from Bengt was something on the lines of, "Wow, this is amazing. I never expected it to happen. I'm so honored." And the quote from the other winner was, "I was wondering when it would happen." That's what makes MIT special. And that makes this group of people special, is that they are just humble, wonderful people who happen to also be incredibly brilliant and transformative in their work. So it's really just an honor and a thrill to have them here today, and you should be, I'm really glad you all could come see this. We're going to go in order of prize winners, chronological. We'll start with Bengt. Bengt Holmstrom is the Paul A. Samuelson Professor of Economics, Emeritus. Bengt came to MIT when I was a junior faculty in 1994, and he was an important part of my growing up in this department and the department ever since. Bengt is one of the founders and key figures in both modern organizational economics and contract theory, where he used the tools of economic theory to help us understand how workers and managers interact and what it means for contracting in the US economy. While his work is some of the best known contributions in theoretical economics in the last 50 years, what's so amazing about Bengt is that his thinking is so clear and really straightforward that he's developed models even I can understand, which is pretty impressive. And he was rewarded for his great research contributions in this area with the Nobel Prize in 2016. So let's first hear from Bengt.
Thank you, John, and thank you it's wonderful to be with all here, and Peter over there, who is the really big figure here behind everything. So it's a pleasure. Let me try it's 3:37, so keep me on track.
Okay, well.
I have just some reflections about, how I have approached economics. That said, I never thought I would become an economist. I mean, after I undergraduate degree I had in mathematics and linear programming was my thesis, and so I went and worked for a company for 2 years, and then I got the chance to basically go to Stanford for a year on a cultural exchange, and that then eventually pulled me into actually getting interested in economics. That said, I rejected economics twice because I thought it was just some kind of a worse version of mathematics or something like that. I thought the idea was to make complicated models. So let me just pick some themes that have, in some sense, guided me, though some of it subconsciously. One is, though curiosity is, I would say, the most important one. My mother all the time told me that, "Why are you asking all these stupid questions?" And my sister, when I got the prize and she gave a little speech at the dinner, said, "Maybe they weren't so stupid." And so I still ask a lot of questions. Not purposefully, but I don't like to not understand. And so I'm a theorist. That's number one for me. The other thing that reflects a little bit on what you said, I really strive always for simplicity. I went from this extreme to thinking that it's complicated, eventually understanding the whole idea is what can you leave out of models and still have something interesting, rather than what can you fit in and be able to solve. So that has been a very big theme for me in my research career. I have to admit, partly it has to do with the fact that I can't do very, very complicated things. At least in economics. But, pushing for simplicity, when you get your first idea, first model, the next question is, can I do it simpler? Can I throw out something? And so in that sense, I'm kind of proud of the simplicity as opposed to thinking that it's too, I don't think there's anything that's too simple. I mean, my ideal would be like Richard Feynman, who used a glass of ice cubes to show why the Challenger blew up. He thinks that if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you haven't thought about it enough. I think that's a little exaggerated, but the basic thing is important things tend to in the end be about simplicity. Related to that is that questions are really hugely more important than answers. I mean, if you ask the right question, there will be a lot of people who can answer it. And it applies, I think, across the board. And it's just, you have been, the transition in economics, say, if you went to PhD program, I think all PhD programs basically have the same nature, that the hardest part is to switch from answering questions, which you have done for, 14, 15 years, whatever career you have had, into asking questions. And in our program, it's the third year is just incredibly painful for PhD students in general, because they have to try to make this shift. It takes them a long time. They feel frustrated. That's where we as faculty members, I think, play our biggest role, trying to reassure them, trying to tell them that's painful, that shift is painful. And so that's a second reason for or the second item I wanted to bring up. The third thing is research is a journey. It's a journey in the same sense that you have to have a destination. You have to have some questions you are aiming for. But you really hope you don't end up where you were sort of aiming for. You think of yourself, I want to go to Rome, but you really hope you never get to Rome, that you find something more interesting. And, I don't know, Paris or whatever it is, that's metaphorically speaking. That's not a laughing number, that happened to me. So I'm taking my own example. But it's really, if you just reach what you were sort of aiming for, it tends to be disappointing in some ways. It worked the way you thought, and therefore you didn't really learn that much. It's when you hit problems, when things don't go the way you thought, is another reason. It's that time that you at least learn something, but sometimes you learn really amazing things. And so I have over my career, mainly with Paul Milgram, who is a brilliant, brilliant guy, we have just rejected, we started, aiming for something, I don't need to say what it is, but we realized on the way to answering the question, it was common agency, it was called. We just ditched the whole we had a whole paper that we could have published. We just ditched it and said the important thing isn't actually at least a common agency. It is about what we ended up calling multitasking. And it was just a big revelation, and it was kind of a brave move in some sense. Most people would have still written the first paper and then gone over to, but I think Paul and I both shared this view, mainly from my advisor and his advisor. We had the same advisor, that you really need to aim on big things. Don't get stuck with some small technical issues and so on. So that's, again, an issue about simplicity. And the last thing I would say, or two things quickly. One thing is surround yourself with the brightest people that tolerate you. And Paul Milgram is just a brilliant example. Jean Tirole, Oliver Hart, Roger Myerson, all prize winners. I mean, just fabulous people. And these people, you know, I have talked a lot with mainly, I guess, with Abhijit and Daron, but, you know, and Peter, of course. And you should never, ever be afraid that you are sort of the dumbest person in the room. You should just say, wow, that's wonderful that I can be with them. And the final thing is, and this has a long list, and that's why I left it last, because I don't want to spend time on it, but most of my papers are contrarian. I love to think, I mean, I'm a skeptical person. I ask why a lot of times. And when I get the sense that the answer is maybe not what they think it is, that's when I get really energized. You know, take the financial crisis. People thought it was because it wasn't transparent enough. You know, Wall Street were trading in things they had no idea what they really represented. My sense was, how likely is it that Wall Street doesn't want to go down to Florida, say, if you saw the Big Short movie, probably most of you didn't. But it must be because it wasn't worth finding out. And so that led to really a very contrarian way of looking at the whole thing and saying the whole idea is to be opaque and not having to know anything, in a certain sense that I don't want to elaborate. So that's the essence of, you know, those kinds of debt contracts, and that's why it didn't matter that they were so complicated. I can see already Daron is tying his shoes in order to run over to this side and hit me, but he gets the chance in the short. But it's all value of information. You know, it's something about you know, free rider problems. Almost every paper that has had any impact have been about the contrarian view. That is, that something we thought was one way actually was the other way. So I think that goes back to asking questions and sticking to the question if you don't understand the answer or don't believe the answer. So I think that's about, is that worth 10 minutes?
That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Bengt. Before we go on to our next speaker, I was remiss in not thanking the wonderful Undergraduate Economics Association, Audrey Lorvo, and her teammates at the UEA for setting up this event, facilitating it. For those who don't know, the UEA is an outstanding organization, strength of the MIT undergraduate program. I hope anybody who's involved in any with economics will get involved with UEA. So thank them so much for setting this up. Our next speaker is Esther Duflo. Esther's the Abdul Latif Jameel Professor of Poverty Alleviation and Development Economics, and also co-directs the Jameel Poverty Action Lab, or JPAL. Esther was a student early in her career at MIT and has been my colleague since 1999. Esther, along with Abhijit Banerjee, who will speak after her, created a revolution in development economics by pioneering the use of field experiments to understand what works and what doesn't in developing countries. This has led to some of the most important research in economics, as well as the founding of JPAL, which has allowed them to leverage their expertise into a network of hundreds of economists doing thousands of projects around the world. Indeed, the research carried out by JPAL affiliates has impacted the lives of more than 600 million people worldwide through the lesson imparted on governments and other organizations. And Esther and Abhijit were rewarded for their amazing work with the Nobel Prize in 2019. But let me just highlight, Esther's work doesn't just focus on the developing world and experiments. Esther is incredibly dedicated to MIT. She helped found our wonderful DEDP program, which allows students from all over the world who might not have had opportunities to come to MIT to get a master's and use that to go on to study economics or do what they will with it. She created that program. She's now serving tirelessly on one of probably the hardest committee at MIT, which is a committee to rethink the undergraduate program. Not that you make any enemies there. She's volunteered for that and is doing yeoman work on that. So Esther is not just a great researcher and great public good provider, but just really someone dedicated to our institution. So I'm really thrilled that she's here on the panel today. Esther, please, you're next.
Thank you. Very glad to be here, but I don't really know how to win a Nobel Prize. I know how not to win one, though. You should not do math, because they don't have one. So that's a sure, if you do your research in math, it's a sure path not to win a Nobel Prize. Hence, for anyone who is an undergraduate in math, it's fine. You can become an economist. We are very, very welcoming to people who have come after math, like Bengt, for example. But if you will continue your career in math, you will not win a Nobel Prize, unless at some point you switch. Now, how to win a Nobel Prize, I don't know. One thing I do know is that it's less about your own research than about the influence that it had on the profession as a whole. I don't think this applies just to economics. I think it applies across fields. Maybe it's different in literature, but certainly it applies in as far as I can tell, in physics, in chemistry, and and in a sense, it is not something you control fully, because you do your own research, and then people, will use it, not use it. It's not really something you can engineer. So maybe the best way is to not think about it at all, since mainly you have to do your best work and then see if it's going to catch in some way or the other. And Nobel Prize or not, presumably this is what one is looking for, because a life is a very short amount of time. So you want to be able to leverage your own work to the extent you think it's important, with the work of other people. And for me, it has always been a pretty fundamental driver in a lot of what I'm doing in my professional life, both in terms of research and in terms of what John was talking about in terms of building of institutions, of research and education. I came to economics, like Bengt, I was not an economist. I started economics, I didn't like it. I also thought it was subpar mathematics. In addition, perhaps it was because I didn't learn here at MIT. I thought it was subpar mathematics meant to disguise some thinly veiled, not very interesting ideology. So the whole thing seemed to me a very dubious project, and I didn't last very long in my undergraduate study as an economist, until I realized when I was spending a year in Russia that actually economists have a lot of influence in the world. And then it sort of caught up another part of me that was always been interesting in trying having an influence in the world. And so then I was like, okay, fine, I can deal with the subpar mathematics, and for some period of time to use this, to seize this tool in order to make a difference in the lives of very many people. So I came to this profession with that goal. And I'm not saying necessarily, like, there could be many other goals that people have, but that was mine, that still is mine. And that was why I decided to do this. And so it's been a driving force in my work, is how I can influence the lives, improve, if possible, the lives of very many people, in particular the people who are the poorest people in the world. So then it sort of guided, I first thought that I needed to learn a lot in order to not influence them in a bad way, partly because I had seen things in Russia that was very scary about how powerful economists could be and how dangerous they could be. And I didn't want to do that, if possible. So I had to learn a lot. I learned from these two people over here, mainly, who were my two advisors. And then I started thinking, what's the most useful way in which I can help as an economist? And I really saw two ways. One is to help people in the ground, so these are policymakers, people working in NGOs, companies, anyone really who is working in the real world, do what they want to do more effectively. So I never saw my role, and I still don't see it to these days, as telling people what they should do, because I think it's a bit difficult, because there are a lot of conflicting desires and a lot of objectives. The political process, democracy, etc., determine what are the objectives of various, if I say, a government at a given point in time. But on the other hand, there are potentially many ways to achieve the same outcome, say having a lot of kids in school, or making sure they're learning something, or saving the lives of mothers, whatever it happens to be. And some are better than others, clearly. And so one could choose the best, if possible. So that's kind of very early on, through the influence of what I learned in labor economics in particular and in development, was that, we should use the data that exists or create new data in order to make this possible. And this is what kind of has driven my research. And very early on, I think something we learned is that you can do one project like this, 2 projects like this, 3 projects like this, but it takes a while. So there are only so many we are going to be able to do ourselves. And if we wanted to change the world of very many people and not like just a few, we have to help other people to do the same work. Hence the creation of JPAL and with other people, sort of an ecosystem, a movement, what we have called a movement to help run this type of project, and not just 1 or 2, but to help thousands of people run projects. So today there are about 1,000 researchers around the world who are involved in JPAL's activity. And so now, of course, it's many more. But then even that is limited, because 1,000 is 1,000, but it's not that many, in fact, thousands. And in particular, it's not distributed very evenly in the world. Most of these 1,000 people are in the US or in Western Europe. Not very many in Africa or in Cambodia, perhaps no one in Cambodia, Vietnam. So then we thought, well, in JPAL we had started a reflection of how do we make sure that this is available to more people. That this tool that has now developed, that we took a lot of time to learn, that we made so many mistakes and we fixed them, how to make sure this tool is more available to people. And so this is how the idea of starting the DEDP program came up, is to kind of make available these tools that using online classes to more people. And then we realized that's actually not enough to have online classes. You need people to actually experience, manipulate things in person, try. You need a lot of contacts. So we need people to be there in reality, to have the experience of doing that physically together in teams. So the DEDP brings people to MIT, but 25. Okay, that's the start, but that's not enough. So the current effort is to now create a network of institutions, we're calling this ADEPT, who will have the ability, using these online courses and their own material, to form many, many more people who will then be able to run this project either as policymakers or as researchers or as professors. And the hope is that this 1,000 will become 10,000, will become. And then eventually, in some sense, the dream would be that if you, and I think that's already true, that if you obliterated all my work, any paper that has my name on it, it would hardly make a difference to the sum total of the number of projects and research that tell us something about how to run better policy in the world. And then eventually, maybe once the world has grown enough that even JPAL will be kind of lost in the math and could, in a sense, will be taken over by the fact that this is something that will become par for the course in many institutions around the world. It won't depend on what's happening in a given country at any given time, which, as we know, can be fluctuates. But it will be kind of, there will always be people somewhere who are doing this kind of work and keep it alive and improve the lives of other people around them. So that's kind of the full vision. I've never come closer in my whole life to have a vision. So this is a world premiere just for you.
Amazing summary. Thank you so much, Esther, for that. Next, we're going to turn to Abhijit. Abhijit Banerjee is the Ford Foundation International Professor of Economics, who's been at MIT since 1993. Like Esther, Abhijit's made the world such a better place through his role in changing the field of development economics and setting up JPAL, which of course was rewarded by their shared Nobel Prize. But what's unique about Abhijit is if he'd listened to others, he wouldn't be here at all. Which is that what folks may not know, and maybe Abhijit will talk about this, is Abhijit is not only one of the leaders of development economics, but also a world-class economic theorist. And he was advised early on to drop this development nonsense and focus on doing economic theory. Now, I'm sure, given Abhijit's brilliance, that if he'd done that, he would have won the Nobel Prize for economic theory. That's a given. But for my money, I'm glad he didn't listen. And I think there's hundreds of millions of people around the world who might agree with me. And so we're thrilled that Abhijit will join us and talk about his journey as well.
Thank you, John. I suspect my colleagues will all dodge this question, but I'll answer it. It's very simple. Well, at least the first step of it is very simple. You find some way of getting a job at MIT. You surround yourself with brilliant people, brilliant students, brilliant colleagues, people like Peter who to mentor you. You learn a lot from them. I can actually specifically name moments when I've learned from each of these people in this panel and from Peter. I remember to the moment, not the date, but the moment when I said, oh my God, I didn't understand that till it got explained to me by Josh or John or Daron or Bengt. Esther. So it's always been you basically, once you're there, that's a good starting point. Then once you understand that principle, you can then associate yourself with an organization like JPAL so that you can then take credit for the works of 1,000 people. And that way you scale up, and then it's easy to get the Nobel Prize. So I have a recipe for you. You can start working on it. I really loved what both Esther and Bengt said, but what Bengt said I want to pick up on, because I don't know whether I'm a contrarian, but I think the thing that I think I've learned a lot from is that it's okay to be wrong, and it's very important to be stubborn about being wrong. That you shouldn't just give up. You should have an idea. You should follow that idea, and don't give it up easily. Fight for it, even if it's wrong. And I'll tell you one of the most illuminating experiences I had. It's the first randomized control trial I was involved in. It was a slam dunk. I learned from Josh that if you increase the number of teachers per student, you get learning goes up. So I knew that. So I started with that. We did an experiment. We doubled the number of teachers per student. Slam dunk. We know the answer. We did a randomized control trial, and it looked somehow that somebody had fudged the data, because when we did the test, we found nothing. Absolutely, precisely nothing. And then so the first, and as I said, the important part was being stubborn. So I decided that clearly this was wrong. So I needed I was measuring something. So I went down the rabbit hole of classroom observation. How do you measure what teachers are doing in classrooms? It has to be different. Or how do you do testing? And there's a whole field of educational testing which I absorbed as well. And so we did everything over again, and we did every classroom observation, and measured every child and how many times they asked a question. The answer is 0, and we found nothing. And at that point, it you really learn a lot from this. Is the fact that you suddenly went through, and I don't think I would learn all that if I said from the beginning, oh, well, that's it. It was very important that I was stubborn. I stuck to it. And in that process, I started to then understand a lot more things, which then inspired other experiments about, it must be that's one of these 5 things that I assumed were all true, and one of them must be wrong. And once you get there, you have a chance of being right. So I think it's very important to be, A, willing to go out on a limb, and B, to stick to your guns. I think those are the two things that I would say really have, and that means that half the time you're wrong. You either do something, you discover that your hypothesis was wrong, or even after your hypothesis is proved right, you're left with, you're right for sometimes the wrong reason, and you discover later that you were right for the wrong reason. But in the process, I think by being specific about the hypothesis and being kind of willing to push it to the point where it sort of starts screaming back at you and you sort of give up, you really learn what you yourself were thinking. In some ways, I think part of all, at least my handicap, is that I'm very happy to, anybody who knows me knows, to have opinions about everything. Then there is the extra force of submitting that opinion to the kind of the relentless force of evidence and time. And oftentimes, as a result, I sort of have to change my mind. But I think the thing that is the great luxury of being a researcher is that. The fact that you don't have to, nothing's riding on it today. There's no one who's going to, paying you for being right in this moment. And so you have the luxury of holding on to your thoughts and learning sort of, because a single thought bisects the world, and it gives you quite specific things to, interrogate or think about, or see what, you see many pieces and they don't fit, and you try to fit them together. And through that process, you learn a lot more than I think you would if you started with the premise, and this is where I think Bengt is absolutely spot on, with the premise that the world is complex. I think the premise the world is complex is, the world is complex, but I think in terms of learning, I think we're much better off kind of pretending and convincing ourselves to hold on to that pretense, that there is something simple that can be illuminating. And it's that simple point that teaches you what the next point might be, and eventually takes you to some knowledge. And I think that I think is the great pleasure and insight of being an economist. I think Bengt and Esther had no plan to be an economist, but I kind of fell into it and eventually understood what the project was. And I must say that now that I've been at MIT longer than any of these people here, John came before me, 1 year before me. I'm really grateful that I fell into this rabbit hole and want to keep going. Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, next we have Josh Angrist, the Ford Professor of Economics, who's been at MIT since 1998. I'm particularly honored to introduce Josh, because he was one of my advisors in graduate school, as well as we learned Esther's advisor. Josh's work has changed the way the entire field of economics thinks about empirical estimates of causal effects. He's given us an entirely new language and way to understand how changing one economic variable can causally impact others. Now, his econometric innovations were canonized into his book, Mostly Harmless Econometrics, which is now the Bible of modern empirical economics, and rewarded with the Nobel Prize in 2021. But once again, befitting what makes MIT Econ great, and what you've heard here, Josh doesn't just work in the abstract, spending all day with Greek notation and matrices. He applies what he's doing to help answer the key questions of our day, like whether charter schools deliver good outcomes for their students. So I'm really pleased to be able to hear from Josh about his path.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Well, I'll start by disagreeing with Abhijit, which I love to do, and since this is an opportunity. I don't think it pays to be too stubborn when you're an empiricist, and in particular, I don't believe in class size effects anymore. I don't think small classes are necessary or contribute to learning. Maybe that has something to do with the fact that my classes have gotten bigger over the years, so I don't really want to come to terms with that. But research that I've done more recently doesn't replicate the earlier findings. So you have to, not be dogmatic at least. You have to come to terms with the fact that findings can change. The prompt here, how to win a Nobel Prize, I don't know if that's the greatest prompt. You could try that on ChatGPT and see what you get. It might need some prompt engineering. But, so I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm sure that you shouldn't try. But a necessary, it shouldn't try to win. A necessary condition is to enjoy economics. If you want to win a Nobel Prize in economics, you should enjoy economics. And unlike some of the other paths that my friends and colleagues here have described, I didn't come to economics by wanting to be a mathematician or a physicist or something like that. I took Economics 101 in college. I had no idea what I was going to do in college, but in my very first semester at Oberlin College, I took Econ 101, and I immediately loved it. It was love at first sight. It was kind of a new way of thinking about the world. I wasn't mathematically precocious. I was failing my calculus class. I had stopped taking math in 10th grade. I didn't know how to work with fractions. But I immediately kind of connected with economics as an analytical framework for thinking about the world. And it seemed very natural to me, and I also liked that it sort of disciplined thinking about public policy and issues that people care about and that matter in people's lives. So I have that in common with the JPAL crew. But I really loved the intellectual framework. I also had a very charismatic teacher who teaches in a style that I adopted, Bob Perron, who's now deceased. He was in the cold calling style. I'd say he was a version of me, maybe squared. He wouldn't probably be legal today, what he was doing. But, I like the give and take and the somewhat pugilistic style that Bob had that I've adapted. And the whole enterprise kind of captured me. And I loved it more and more as I went on. I didn't like every course I took, but I particularly liked microeconomics, microeconomic theory, which I thought was very elegant. Macro mystified me as a college student and still mystifies me, but I found many things to engage with. Micro, of course, is the whole broad world of things. And then as a senior in college, I discovered empirical economics. I did an empirical honors thesis and collected data and wrote computer programs to analyze that data. And I did not find anything very useful or interesting, but I really enjoyed the activity, and that sort of reinforced my sense that this was a good career for me and something that I like doing and that I could do reasonably well, at least better than anything else that I could entertain doing at the time. So that kind of put me on the path to eventual scholarship. And then I've been lucky to work at very good places like MIT and Harvard, where John was my student many years ago in my first job, and have wonderful colleagues that stimulate me and help me think of interesting questions. And I've continued to love economics and see economics as a very powerful tool that offers insights into many things in the world, some abstract, some very practical. And one of the reasons I like teaching at MIT, and I think this is maybe one of the special pleasures for us, all of us as teachers at MIT, is not that many people particularly undergraduates, come to MIT thinking, well, I want to major in economics. But most of our students do take economics. And so we kind of have a chance to win some converts here. And I feel like that's one of the pleasures and challenges of my work here, is to convert people like you to our discipline. And I work hard at that, and I count that among my successes when I do succeed.
Last but not least, we come to Daron Acemoglu, who's been at MIT since 1993 and is one of the 12 MIT Institute professors. Daron's a force of nature, publishing prolifically across dozens of areas, making him one of the very best published and cited economists alive today. Indeed, Daron's work is so broad that when it was announced he won the Nobel Prize, the question was not why, but for which thing. He could have won for so many different things. It was just not clear what the choice was. But in this case, the award was for his path-breaking work on understanding how institutions are central to economic growth. This work was fundamental, as it took economic growth away from being solely in the playpen of macroeconomists and recognized the central role the political economy can play. And of course, it's more timely than ever. Daron's work has shown that democratically accountable institutions are the bedrock of economic growth and success. Yet these institutions are eroding around the world. So there's no one better to remind us of what we stand to lose if we don't pay attention than Daron. So Daron, please.
Thank you, John. Well, it's great to be here with my esteemed colleagues. One thing, I think everybody here joined MIT in 1999. It's cohort effects. So this is, sorry?
Abhijit and I are older than that.
No, sorry, 1990s, that's what I meant. Sorry, 1990s, yeah. Not 1999, 1990s. Yeah. So having good colleagues, that's absolutely great, and I think I've been blessed with that. But let me first say that, apologies, I have a flight to catch, so I'm going to leave a little early, so warning. Second, what I'm going to say, just as that opening suggests, is very congruent with what everybody else said. I think those were very insightful comments. I'll just give it a slightly different twist. And I'm not going to engage too much with how to win a Nobel Prize. I think if there's one answer I could give is be very, very, very lucky. I think that would kind of convey all of the same ideas. And I don't think, you want to go into a field with the ambition of getting the best or the most prestigious prizes in that field. I think you want to be passionate about what you're doing. I'm sure it's apocryphal or I'm making it up, but I think it was Napoleon who said, when you go to cadet school, you dream of becoming a general, not of becoming a president. Well, I don't think you should even dream of becoming a general, but like a colonel is good enough. So, what are the things that I can do that are in line with my passions and I enjoy it? I think that's very, very important. And I didn't have a roadmap of, this is what I wanted to do, or, it was all stumbling onto different things. But I think I was very lucky that I worked on things that I was passionate about. And I think that's the one I would really recommend to people. When my graduate students sometime, despair because they're not getting the job at Harvard or Stanford and some other, slightly lower down institution, I tell them this story, which I think applies to everybody, and I think it's one of the best aspects of sort of, for me, captures it. James Robinson and I, we wrote a first draft of our book, The Narrow Corridor, and we had a book conference at Northwestern, and we had a chapter on ancient Greek city-states. So we were trying to find an expert, so we found a lady, and she was just amazing. She just brought an incredible amount of knowledge and enthusiasm and discussion. Just like the passion was amazing. And then just like when I talked to her, it's like I realized she did one PhD in archaeology, then she did another PhD in political science, and then she couldn't get a job, and she was a postdoc for the last 6 years at some university. But that didn't, dent her enthusiasm because she just loved the topic that she was studying. And I think if you can find something like that, I think that's the greatest thing. And whether it leads to a prize or not is secondary. But I'm sure if you combine that with the right sort of investment in sort of technical investment in learning all the tools and hard work, I think that's going to be great. And for me, again, it was just like a complete stumbling into that. Like Josh, I loved economics as soon as I understood what it was, although I was drawn to it because I was sort of interested in other topics, into issues of institutions, and I thought that's what economics would be studying. I'll say a few words about that. But I think at the end, I always say I learned almost all of the economics I know, like in about 2 years when I was an undergraduate, because I read so much, because before then I didn't like studying, and then once I sort of understood economics, and just like Josh, I liked the fact that it had a technical element and it was engaging with theory and data. I just read a lot, and I formed all of my sort of basic economic intuitions during that process. And that sort of thing, I think, is rewarding. Again, at the time, it wasn't planning for anything. It was just having fun. But I think that was part of the journey. And I think, Bengt, Esther, Abhijit, Josh have all captured one aspect of this. Science is about information sharing. So you have to produce the information, or you have to contribute to the production of information, and you have to share it, and share it in a useful way. What does that mean? It's hard to put an exact definition, but I think these sort of comments that especially the Bengt that Abhijit made capture some aspect of that. When I was early on in my undergraduate years, I read Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which talked about, you have normal science, and then you have paradigm shifts. That was very interesting. There are some interesting ideas. But I think it sort of misses the point in one crucial respect. Normal science, which is what most of us do, is not just like doing what everybody else is doing. You want to contribute something to other people's thinking. We all have our own confirmation biases. And if I just went to Abhijit and Esther and I said, I did a randomized control trial just like you've done 100 of them, and I found exactly the same results as you have, they'll say, oh, that's great, and it won't have much of an effect on them. But if I could go to them and tell them something that makes them think, and that make them think might be because it's an unusual result or a different twist or something that has a different mechanism, I think that will start getting them to think. And it's whatever is true for them, I think it's true for the broader scientific community and going beyond that scientific community. So that's the sense in which I think the contrarian comment of Abhijit and Josh's comments, I think, are still sort of, to me, to sound very much true to me. So for me, the thing that I was passionate about was thinking about, why is it that some countries are growing and they have very different political and social arrangements. President Reagan joked that the scariest 10 words in the English language are, I am from the government, I'm here to help. It sounded very funny in the context of people who were not so happy. But actually, I think he had it backwards. To me, those 10 words might be like the most surprising and inspiring things because, chimpanzees cannot understand us. But if they did understand, I think they would find it most surprising that humans can have like this amazing powers in their hands in the state of a state or institutions, and those institutions actually try to provide public services or laws for people or improve the life. I mean, just incredible to think something like that. And many human societies have sort of achieved that. Some of them, not willingly, revolutions and uprisings, some of them via different paths. And despite that, we still have North Korea, we still have, many other countries may be going down that path nowadays. So it's not like a happy story that we have all converged to something much better than what one could have imagined. So it's like not what like an optimistic end of history type of story. So that institutional variation is what really excited me, and I've been passionate about studying that, and that passion, I think, could have easily become frustrated, and that's where luck comes in. That's where great colleagues come in. And one thing I have to say about the economics profession, I think there are a lot of things you can criticize economists for, but I found it to be extremely open-minded, and that I would say is like the greatest selling point for people who are thinking of what discipline I should go in. Every discipline has its blind spots. Every discipline has its leaders, who, block change. It's like Max Planck's saying that science progresses one funeral at a time. That's least, I think, in economics. And here, the things that even Bengt studied, which is now, I've said even because it's now in every textbook. At the time they were done, wasn't what was usual, and then people embraced it. Esther and Abhijit in development economics, or Josh in the causal effects econometrics. There was a lot of resistance, but once the results came in, people embraced it. So there's a bit of a resistance, but a lot of open-mindedness to that. Same thing in behavioral economics, which has become a big field, and studies that fall within my interest area, institutions and political economy, exactly the same thing. I think that's really inspiring, and one of the great reasons for people to be able to choose economics and pursue the kinds of things that they are passionate about, knowing that that could lead somewhere. I think that's the best we can hope for. Thank you.
That was an amazing panel. Now, I was an undergrad here at MIT, and I was an economics major, and I know there's a certain insecurity that comes to being an economics major at MIT, like we're not tough like those Core 6 majors or whatever. But you know what? They don't have 5 Nobel Prize winners sitting here that you get to talk to. So you now have 24 minutes to ask questions of 5 of the most impressive people you'll ever meet. Don't blow this. I know we all know statistically about the law of large numbers. We also have the law of large crowds, which is the bigger the crowd, the less likely any one person is willing to raise their hand and ask a question. But this is a rare opportunity. What we'll do with questions is, please, if you have a question, just stand up, state your name and what year you are, and ask the question. To allow everyone to ask questions, I'm not going to have everyone answer every question. I think what we'll do is just go down the line. So whatever question you have, the next person in the line will answer. We'll start with Daron and come back this way. And so if others on the panel have really important things they want to add, raise your hand and jump in. But I want to make sure everyone has a chance to ask something. So we actually have a mic. This is great. So why don't folks raise their hand, stand up, and actually, you know what? Make it easy. Why don't folks come line up? Why don't folks come line up here, and then we can ask questions a little easier rather than trying to get the mic passed around all over the place. So we have 2 mics, so we can form 2 lines. Stephen, come on in. Go ahead. Yeah.
First of all, hi. Thank you so much. Incredible to see you all.
Name and year.
Sorry, yes. Yeah. My name is Alex Brennan. I'm a senior, 614, and there's a lot of things happening in the world all the time. Our attention is a valuable resource, and we have to think about how we employ that in the short term and in the long term. And my question leading from that is, what do you think that we should be paying attention to now, and what do you think we should be keeping an eye on for the long term?
Daron.
I mean, I think for me, again, this is sort of something that has evolved over time, but most of my interests in terms of research questions actually come from things that I observe. And I work on AI because, I saw a lot of the developments in AI, and I thought they would be important, and I didn't understand them. I thought they weren't generally well understood, and that was something that drew me. A lot of the my interest in institutions came from what I observed around myself when I was growing up in Turkey, and likewise, continuation of those questions were also influenced by the developments that I saw around myself. So I think it is natural to be drawn to different things that you're seeing. The hard part, but also the exciting part, is exactly merging that with what Bengt said. More than 50% is asking the question in a way that is both answerable with the tools that we have and insightful along the lines of, if I get some answers from this, can I then share this in a way that will add to other people's knowledge, will make other people ask questions? And for different people, it will be different things that they'll say, oh yes, this is something that it's both exciting, about which I can be passionate, and I can actually say something about it. So it's a personal thing as well.
Great answer. Yes, on that side.
Thank you so much.
Oh, that mic's not on there.
Yeah, it is. It needs to speak closer to it. It just needs to be closer to your mouth.
Just say it loud. We'll get you a new one.
Okay. Hi, my name is Mohammed, and I'm studying AI at Harvard. So I'm a double convert. So I have a degree in medicine, then I did economics, and now I'm studying AI. My question is regarding because of your background in economics, that why economists are not very open to other causal methods getting into their research. Right now we have very few methods that we all follow. But then there are other fields that are also, like for instance, in epidemiology as well, there are some other causal methods, but we never see that something like that is being published in the economics journals. So that's one take review on that.
Very excellent, Josh. Perfect.
I'm not sure what you mean by other causal methods.
By the way, speaking of open-minded.
Outside of econometrics, I have lots of friends in the epidemiology, life sciences world, and their problems are very similar to our problems. They're almost always concerned with causal effects, whether it's individual therapies or treatments or public policies such as lockdowns during COVID. So, the problems in the life sciences or epi domain are very familiar to me. And I believe that the tools that we offer, answer those questions. I've been trying to encourage the use of econometric tools in the life sciences for 30 years. And only recently, I'm very pleased to have a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine on instrumental variables. And the American Medical Association is about to revise their official policy on causality. And I've contributed to that and will continue to contribute to that. This is not my fault, but the American Medical Association journals, which include the Journal of the American Medical Association and other very high status journals in life science and medicine, until now, you were not allowed to use causal language unless it was a randomized trial. And while I love randomized trials as much as the next guy, and probably more, I do think that there are other methods that reveal causal effects. So I think that medicine and econometrics are converging. I don't see that there's any exclusions there.
Great question. Next question.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I'm only a freshman undergrad, so don't know exactly what I want to do yet, but probably something with math. So I guess my question is probably mostly for Esther. I've been getting into effective altruism a lot recently and having conversations with my friends about maximizing impact per dollar. And one of my friends made the comment that there's the most alpha in trying to convince Jeff Bezos' ex-wife what effective altruism is and what a randomized controlled trial are, just so they more effectively distribute their wealth. And I was just wondering how decisions like that, speaking to higher up government officials and people who have accumulated a lot of wealth have come into expanding JPAL.
Well, since we went out of order, we'll let Esther, since you got asked directly. Esther, you got asked directly, so we'll let you respond.
There is a lot to unpack. One is the effective altruism comment per se, which could cover many things. Let me take the opportunity to say one thing. I think it's a lot of MIT undergraduate are looking for meanings, and then a lot of people in the world are looking for meaning. And I would encourage you to take classes in philosophy or in political science, etc., to look for somewhat more sophisticated understanding of values and all that than what you will get in a 101 effective altruism course. Because my understanding of the effective altruism movement per se is that it can get really caricatural, which you want to avoid. And you want to take the opportunity that you are here, surrounded by brilliant people across the fields, to listen to very many various perspectives on these difficult moral issues of what we owe to each other, what it means to being human, and then form your own opinion on these questions, and not look for the one-line answer, which we're all looking for, but it really doesn't exist. I think this, I'm not sure this was the questions you were asking, but I'm taking the opportunity to answer it. And there are plenty of resources at MIT across departments. On the how you convince people, in a way, if you look at the story of JPAL over the last 20 years, really been a lot about, the first few meetings we had about the idea that you could do randomized controlled trial to know what works in social policy and not just in medicine. People thought we were crazy, like complete nut jobs, or idiots, or both. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we had this one meeting, and Abhijit was saying, the randomized control trial, it's not rocket science. And someone stood up and said, human beings are so much more complicated than rockets. I was like, okay, this is not going well. And from these beginnings, it really has improved, where now you talk to many people in governments around the world. I must say almost more in the poorer countries than in some of the richer countries. I've gotten totally into the idea that, there's so many things we don't know, we can learn, evidence, etc. And in philanthropy, actually, in part thanks to the effective altruism movement, it has also progressed, not in everyone, but in many of them. And some of the biggest dollars are now following the science in what they choose to promote, in what they choose to give money to. So it happens more in how would I say, one experiment at a time, where you are showing people, it's like a lot of show, not tell. This is how it can work for you. This is how you get results that you were maybe not expecting. This is how it leads to, often it's like saying, well, many things don't work the way we were expecting, so there would be a lot of money to be wasted on the wrong things. And actually a lesson that is useful for philanthropists who prefer to use their money effectively, useful for NGOs who have very limited means, and useful for government who prefer to show effectiveness. And I would take the opportunity to second Daron that one of the most fascinating and exciting things in my work is most of the people you meet in governments are in there because they want to be helpful. And once you understand that, actually there is so much you can do because you realize you're kind of sharing an objective.
Excellent. On this side, please.
Hi, I'm Braden. I study physics and economics. I'm a junior here. I've been caught up in complex sciences and so-called econophysics and the work of Santa Fe Institute and NEXI and Doyne Farmer and those types. And I'm curious if you think that sort of interdisciplinary field, which has not been mainstream and still isn't, or some of the agent-based model, that sort of thing, is worth a young economist's time these days, or if I'm kind of getting caught up in a wormhole that has an end.
Abhijit.
I think Daron is about
you are the one who you have an opinion on that one.
Dodge the bullet.
I'm happy. I thought you were going to leave, so I thought people should hear your last words. So, when I first came to MIT,
was less than 30 and not, or no, barely 30, and not particularly, I think, given to be, to be emphatic. So I was invited to various events, and there was a particular moment that I remember very vividly. There was a professor of some field I will not name, but not economics, who basically explained to me that, the world is a differential equation, and that once you study if you understood how to study differential equations, this whole economics business would become much less fraught. And, he could explain it to me. And I didn't take his offer. And I think it goes back a bit to, I think, my concern with I think a lot of this literature goes back to, I think, what Bengt said, which is that I think our reaction to the fact that the world is extraordinarily complicated is, in a sense, we don't even believe that we could map it out, that we could write down the differential equation of the world. We don't think that's a feasible or meaningful project. We think we get insights in smaller pieces, that you think of a very small slice of that world, and you look at what happens there. And there, I don't think it's the technology of whatever, mathematics that's used in physics that's very useful. It's what Bengt said, I think, that's critical, which is how to formulate the problem so that you don't get lost in the weeds. And I think what Bengt and Daron have both done incredibly insightfully, because they are the two theorists, is to do that, and Peter, to create sub-worlds that are capture the essential aspects of reality, and you understand something, and you say, aha, I didn't realize that once I look at it through that lens, there is a specific answer. And that's often the best of economics, is that ability to take a tiny sliver of it, but then show that sliver gives you an insight that is sort of overarching and takes you well beyond where it is. So in that sense, I think of the econophysics project as being maybe not based on the same understanding of economics that I have.
All right, on this side. All right.
Hello, I'm Adam, MIT, bachelor's in Math and AI 24 and current operations research PhD. My question is, how much power do you have to write, edit, or lobby for economic laws? And where have you seen the most success? On what level, national, state, or local?
Well, Bengt's turn. Bengt, do you want to?
I need to ask you to move the mic a little further so I hear the question. I have a little problems with consonants, so I don't hear it.
You want me to move the mic
further? If you could just repeat your question with a little more distance of the...
more distance, okay.
The question, Bengt, is how much power do economists have to actually
to lobby for, to edit, to
change the world, to make policy, to make a difference?
Amazingly much, in some sense. I speak as a theorist. I could mention some theories that absolutely have changed the world, starting from Adam Smith, but going to ideas about finance, option prices. There is a missing Nobel Prize winner here at the Sloan School. Bob Merton, was part of formulating the option pricing theory. Some of them are unbelievably simple, like basically the theories about, does capital structure matter, which everybody thought matters a great deal until a group of people came and said, well, let's just think about all the take away all the frictions, and they concluded that basically it was about, it's like slicing a pie. It doesn't matter whether you slice it into equity and debt. It matters no more than you slice a pizza into different sized pieces. And so, you hear that story. It completely transformed the finance. this idea sounds utterly trivial. So then it didn't occur even to people to think about it. And I would say it was the most revolutionary theory or change. I mean, I can hear disagreements, but it's like Abhijit says, it's a pure theory, it's an imagined world. But we understand that imagined world, and going from there, we have a stake in the ground from which we can then go and look at various kinds of imperfections, so to speak. But it just clarifies the mind in an amazing way. So I think of these things as I'm defending the theory a little bit in the sense that I think a good theory is just unbelievably powerful. And there are not that many really big theories. But there are some, and if one gets to be part of even a small part of it, it's incredibly satisfying in some sense,
I want to just say one name that we haven't named is Modigliani, and this capital structure inside is his. Another MIT Nobel Prize winner.
This was
his name got missed, but another truly brilliant.
He's not with us anymore, but he was. So I think that's why I'm in the game, so to speak. I'm not in the game to be famous. I have to say that I have always felt, going back to my childhood, I want to know answers. And whether it's just me that learns some answer, I'm just happy about it. It's kind of a genetic flaw of some sort. And I think the happiest moments in my life has not been even the Nobel Prize. I would say having a good question and feeling that you can answer it. That's the heroic moment. Notice, having the question and thinking you can answer it. That's the sweet spot for me. Because once you have answered it, it's sort of, okay, then it's over. But look, you kind of know that you're opening that Christmas present, you don't know yet what's inside.
Look, I know we're not done. Daron's going to have to run. I do want to highlight as Daron runs, these are really busy, important people. Okay, this is an incredible, the ability of the UEA to bring these folks together and the willingness of folks to spend the time to do this is incredible. So as Daron leaves, let's give one more round of thanks. We're not done. Let's give one more round of thanks. Daron has to go off. As the most recent winner, he's the busiest of all. So he has to go off and give some speech or talk to some world leader to come to your question. But why don't we move on? We have time for a few minutes. Let's go to this side.
Perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Christoph. I'm a final year medical student and pursuing a PhD in computational neuroscience. So thank you for the great panelists, for the organization. Really interesting. And I want to celebrate the interdisciplinarity here, because I'm wondering, what can neuroscience learn from economics and the other way around? We have some economics actually in our lab working together with them. And I mean, at the end of the day, we are interested in causal modeling, and at the basis of all what you are doing, there are human brains, right? So there should be things we can learn from each other. Thank you.
It's a great question. I think...
maybe I can, unless you want to, this one, I can jump to this one, because I have a co-author in neuroscience. So,
me too.
Oh, but go ahead.
You can both.
You can both talk. No, please, don't be shy. I know you're usually so shy.
John Gabrielli?
No, mine is Elise Pelke. You go ahead.
Okay.
Because yours is an MIT one, so that's an even better.
We do some work. Parag, Pathak, David Otter, and I run a lab called Blueprint Labs, and among other things, we study schools and K-12 school children, and we look for, we try to estimate effects of various educational, institutional structures, and one of the things we study are learning differences in schools of different types. And we're not actually mostly running randomized trials there. We're looking for natural experiments. Anyway, sometimes we have done that work in collaboration with John Gabrielli from neuroscience, who is sort of very much into the details of how children learn. And we find a kind of a common language with him. Not in everything that we do, but lots of overlap. What's your neuroscience story, Esther?
Yeah, so actually Abhijit and I both work with Elise Pelke at Harvard from the Harvard Child of Development, and maybe I'll tell the story of how I came to work with her. Just when I had my first baby, there was a big photo of her, and this was the psychologist who talks to baby. And it was about how she discovered that you can understand what surprise babies, even very small babies, by looking at how long they're looking at something. And I thought this was fabulous, that someone could think of that you can just think what babies think by looking at how long they're looking at one. So I thought this person is like Bono, to me, like superstar. And then I gave a talk, and still with this very young baby, and she was in the room. And it's like, oh, Bono has come to my talk. It must be a sign. And so I actually sought her out, and I said, look, you have these ideas, how kids learn. You have to take this out of the lab to do something useful with it for once. And she was super excited to do that, because all of our work had been this like very detail-oriented measurement, etc., and it really never gone out of the lab. And honestly, I think in this particular side of the collaboration, my job as an economist is to keep the trains running on time. I really doesn't really do anything that someone else couldn't do. Like I run the experiment, I make sure the samples are large enough, and this and that. But it's been a wonderful collaboration, I think, on both sides, because what it has led also is that basically the neuroscientists, at least they never get out. They don't know how to do it. The PhD students don't know how to do it. And we kind of roped many of them, and they went to the field, and it's kind of... So I think we have something to bring. It's a bit accidental, maybe, that it's the economists who got into running real experiments in the real world on education. It could have been them. But since it's us, we have that to bring, and in exchange, they have this really super structured way to think about the world. So it's been... I think this is really interdisciplinary at its best, because we are not meeting in different middle ground. I think we are each bringing what we know how to do, and to do a project that could not have been done otherwise. And that, of course, could be done in collaboration in other fields, but that's the best way to think about it, is coming to interdisciplinarity with very strong disciplinary knowledge. So you should be very confident in whatever department you are to become an expert at what it is you're doing, which you can then bring to other fields. I think that's the most helpful thing in the way of thinking about interdisciplinarity.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, this side.
Hi, my name's Dia. I'm a freshman, and I really like being at the intersection of different things. So this question is, again, going to be a little bit more about interdisciplinary things and intersections. I was wondering how much of your journey so far has been about super specializing and being an expert in what you do, and how much of it is about being interdisciplinary, and where do you think you're going after this?
It's a great question. Bengt?
I think you start off as specialist. I recommend being a specialist originally, not as an undergraduate. I mean, undergraduate, you go and taste everything you can here. That's a wonderful opportunity. But when you get into the PhD programs or such, I think it's a good idea at least to be specialized, because you have to get tenure and other things. But with time, you realize that there are other things, and you sort of branch out. I think part of the problem with interdisciplinarity is that there are a lot of donors who they don't see some. They see here is one field, here's another field, but what's in the middle, so to speak, and shouldn't. So they try to get us to play in the same sandbox, but like kids, they choose their playmates, and that's what gets a sort of a bad reputation, I think, for interdisciplinary research, is that somebody from outside comes with money and sort of tries to force us. Somehow they think we are so dumb we can't find. When there is a need, I don't know if that applies to your story, but time and again you see that when we need somebody else in another field, we find the person. It's not that difficult to find the person. You start studying papers and others and realize, hey, they are doing the same thing, and they are doing it in an interesting way. And so I'm in that sense, presidents always want, interdisciplinarity, the presidents of the universities, because that brings money. For some reason, people who donate, they always want to do interdisciplinary stuff, because they think by combining A and B, we are going to get something very much. Usually it's not a good idea. So I think you should start with being a specialist on something. I think that trains you just to think more critically and not jumping back and forth from easy things here, and then when it doesn't work, you go to the other easy thing. Abhijit was right. You have to be stubborn and stick to a question. I would say question is important, and so that's my recommendation for you. You can pick. The simplest thing I did in the late years when I still advised, I was basically saying to the students, I say, they came with 5 projects or 10 projects or whatever. I said, pick one of them. And my task is just to prevent you from doing anything else than this for the next month. That's all I'm doing. Because when you hit boundaries and you're alone, you're so tempted to go to something easier or something like that. But you have to be able to stick to something that doesn't seem to move, but eventually moves.
Great. All right. This side.
Hi, my name's Megha. I actually just finished my undergrad at Hopkins, and I was an econ major, but then also became an applied math major for the same reasons. I actually work at JPAL now, and I have a twofold question of sorts. So there's been a recent replicability crisis or a reproducibility crisis in a lot of different fields, especially economics. And I guess my question is, yes, there exists an evidence gap, and we've been trying to fill a lot of these gaps, but once you start doing the research and you get a certain answer, but then you go back and that answer is not the same anymore, what do you do? Especially in developing countries where you need an answer so you can actually have effective policies that are also cost effective. And so how do you kind of balance that line with, do you just go ahead and implement the policy as it is, or do you go back to the drawing board, and how often do you do the back and forth?
Abhijit, this seems like a good one for you.
It's a great question because it gives me an opportunity. So one of the things you can be stubborn about is that I don't know the answer. That's also that this is an unanswered question, and that I'm not going to be persuaded easily that this has A answer or B answer. It's going to be, I really don't trust very much of what's around, and that I'm going to remain skeptical. That could be about your own work. It could be that you've done something, but you're not fully convinced that there is something there to hold on to, and and so I don't think I don't think it's ever different with anything. There's never going to be a moment when maybe if you were in, I don't know, you had your goal was to sell something and you sold it and you could be done. But when it's a policy, and when there's always the thought, A, is it working, and B, is it working for the right reason? Both questions are always going to be there. So you're going to always be wondering about, how much, and at some point you have to make a call and say that, look, I've been persuaded enough that I'm going to be willing to speak out about it. But it's not a decision about having reached truth. It's a decision about, this is the compromise I'm willing to accept. I see that there is, it's still mixed. I'm not completely convinced that the reason I think it works is the same as the reason that, it actually works. But I have, at some point, the trade-off between kind of exploration and utilization gets to be, solid enough that you want to say, okay, fine, I'm willing to take, I'm willing to compromise with my own doubts to that point. But I do think that it's not because I'm convinced that, that this evidence is completely dispositive and therefore I have no doubts left. That's not the goal, or you will never get there. So I don't see it as a deep problem. In some ways, I think it's a problem of all of us at all points of time. You walk out of the door, you don't expect your door, the top of the door to fall on you when you do that. it could fall on you one day. So you're always in that, there is always a degree of skepticism. We always assume the world is somewhat stable place. It's no different from that. There's no sense in which you're guaranteed, there is a moment of blinding insight which says that I have reached the truth. And
so we have time for one last, I'm sorry. We have time for one last question.
Hello, my name is Siddhant Mukherjee. I am a senior in 6th and 18 and minor in econ. My question has to do with project selection. So the way that I see it, there's this question of how long do you push on a problem and what selection of problems you have. So it seems like there's some kind of like risk allocation across your lifetime that, okay, I'm going to maximize my impact over my entire career. So I was kind of curious of how you think about this problem and exactly which problem you select from, like, let's say a candidate 5 questions.
Josh?
That's a great question, and that is one of the hardest problems for researchers. I think of it as like a portfolio problem, because you are literally investing. Sometimes you're investing money, sometimes it's even a lot of money, but the most valuable thing you're investing is your time. And so you want to do that wisely. And you're torn in all sorts of directions. Something is not going well. I should abandon this terrible project. I'm never going to get anything good out of this. Sometimes things are going very well, and then maybe you're tempted only to work on that one thing. So I think some of the lessons of portfolio decision making apply. You probably want to diversify, but you do, and I think a big difference between people who kind of succeed in academia and people who don't is that they have good instincts about good questions. And of course, it's easy to say have good instincts. You should also be lucky, as Daron said, in terms of your questions. That helps a lot. But again, the portfolio manager knows that you can make your own luck by making good decisions, by diversifying. One thing to understand is that you're in a marketplace for ideas. And so there's sort of 2 things going on there that are important. Of course, you don't want to work on something that you think is boring or stupid or not interesting, but there has to be a market for your work, ultimately. So you need to answer questions that other people care about. And so when I think about, is this a worthy question for me? Do I want to spend time on it? It has to be intellectually challenging for me and fun for me. But I also want to believe that there's somebody besides me and, Esther and Abhijit who are going to want to read the paper. It's not nearly as satisfying to work on something that nobody's going to read. So I always ask myself about the audience. And sometimes I work on things that are not super intellectually compelling, but there's no new econometric issue, and the empirical work is pretty pedestrian, but then there's a huge market for it. People care about the question. And sometimes I work on things that are more, my customers there are more people in the discipline, and there's an intellectual side. But I'm always asking myself, what's the market for this? And am I going to have fun doing it?
Bengt wants to have our senior panel member have the last word.
Just, this is where you need a thesis advisor. Who says,
at the beginning.
My advice would be pick any of those questions and don't use portfolio theory. You start it and then you stick to it and you learn from it and you go to the next and next. That would be my advice.
Well, as we said, an open field with healthy disagreements. And this has been an amazing event. So let's please once again thank our panelists for their time.